Welcome back to Giving Tuesday live at Boyce Thompson Institute. This is our lunch hour session, and we are joined by two people that are big fans of making things out of science, and their names are Paul Debbie and Erica Fishel from our Tech Transfer Department, and we'll learn a little bit about what Tech Transfer does. Paul has been on our podcast before. He was on this broadcast last year. I don't know if Paul, if you remember any of that. You just kind of do what I ask.
I do remember.
So you're really nice about that. and Erica is relatively new to BTI, and we'll learn all about her experience. But she does have a connection to BTI that we'll talk about, which is always fun. So this is Giving Tuesday, National Day of Nonprofit Giving, and we're bringing you insights and up-close discussions with the people at BTI that make this place work and push out all this great research that has a tremendous amount of impact on agriculture, the environment, and human health. And if you are interested in learning more about how to support BTI or why you might want to support BTI, as the screen shows, you can visit btiscience.org/give and learn all about the ways you can help advance discovery science here at BTI. So with that little sales pitch out of the way, let's talk tech transfer. Paul and Erica. Paul, I guess maybe both of you could give us a quick little bit of background, a professional background, and kind of how you found your way to your role at the Boyce Thompson Institute.
Want me to start?
Sure.
Sure, yeah. So let me give you a quick overview of how I ended up where I am today. I've been at BTI for 19 years now, so I've been here for quite a long time. I originally came to BTI in a technical position to set up a genomics facility, working with Greg Martin, Jim Giovanoni, and other scientists here at BTI. I personally have some experience with a startup company that came out of technology that I was working on as a graduate student. Over time here at BTI, I was offered a position working in tech transfer, and it slowly evolved into the full-time position that I've had for probably the last 10 or so years. And as I think we'll talk a little bit more about probably soon, one of the things that BTI is beginning to work on are several different startup companies based on BTI technology. And so I'm getting more involved with that. So I have a new position here at BTI that's called the Director for Translational Science and New Business Development. I'm also the Director of Research here at BTI. So that's kind of where I am now.
And Erica.
I've been here going on my third month.
3 months. 3 good months.
That's right. But I was here at BTI 12 years ago as a summer intern as part of the research experience for undergraduates, an NSF-funded program.
Which we will learn more about in 3 o'clock. So
Okay.
come on back, learn more about the internship program.
So I was here 12 years ago, and that's really where I got my start in plant science. I was an undergraduate at the University of Kansas, then really fell in love with the idea of molecular biology. Got a PhD from Washington University in St. Louis, and found that even though I love science and the great, wonderful things that go on in plant biology, I didn't actually like doing it. And so I left the bench and worked for a law firm in intellectual property, which allowed me to understand and see all the wonderful, great science, but not actually have to do it. And from there, I went and I worked at the Danforth Center, which is a sister institute to BTI. Was there for just about 5 years before coming here a couple months ago.
So for everyone at work and at home around the world, when I say the word tech transfer, sounds pretty cool, but what's the high level view? What's kind of the dictionary definition we're talking about when we say tech transfer as it relates to BTI science? Or in general?
What I like to say is that I'm not doing my job if all that happens is a idea is created on the bench and it comes out as a paper, or it's a really excited postdoc who maybe gets a job somewhere. That's all well and good, but the idea is to take that from a benchtop exercise and translate it into a science that touches consumers, that touches the average person, that makes it beyond just the publication and the benchtop exercise.
Paul?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, and also, like I said, one of the ways that we're trying to translate BTI science is to start companies based on our technology. You know, we do what we call traditional out-licensing of technology, where we can partner with commercial entities. But, you know, we're a very basic science institute here at BTI, so a lot of our technology is really new and has a lot of development that has to go on behind it before it's really ready to translate into something commercial. So, you know, Erica works hard at licensing and commercial partnerships, and now my focus is really on startups, that sort of third leg of how we do translational work.
Yeah.
So just to give everyone an idea of what, when we say technology looks like coming, or intellectual property coming out of BTI, what are some of your, you know, since you've been here, Paul, or even Erica, in terms of, you know, what you did at Danforth, what are some of your favorite examples of a technology that came out of BTI into the market, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give one example since I've been at BTI long enough. When I first came here to BTI, one of the programs that was being worked on were oral plant-based vaccines. So these were vaccines produced in plants, potentially to even be orally administered, as opposed to a vaccine administration. Mm-hmm. And one of the projects that they were working on was actually expressing vaccine constructs in bananas. So you could basically make a vaccine in a banana, put that banana, those green bananas, in a box, and maybe ship them off to a country where they don't have that chain of refrigeration that it takes for most sort of modern vaccines. And so that was a really interesting project, and we had a 6-year project with Dow AgroScience developing plant-made vaccines. We didn't actually make oral vaccines in the end, but it did lead to the first USDA, and this was the first ever approved plant-made vaccine. It was a poultry veterinary vaccine, so that was a pretty cool project. Great.
Erica, have any favorites?
Not as of yet from here, but certainly am working to find new things and get them to a point where I can hand them off to Paul to form new companies.
So I think one of from where I sit, you know, I see, as you mentioned, Paul, we are a basic research institute. What kind of challenges does that pose for a tech transfer department? Does that make you need to be more creative? Is it tougher to market some of this stuff because it maybe isn't as, you know, quote unquote obvious of a direct impact? So you know, take us through, perhaps maybe, you know, you go to sit down with a researcher because you think they might have something that you could kind of spin out. What does that process look like?
Well, I think, to answer one of your first questions, that unlike if we were at a company where there isn't a fine balance between novel and innovative research and publication and the dissemination of that information, we of course do have that balance that has to be walked. And so if we were, say, at a larger corporation, it'd be very easy. We'd tell all of the great researchers that are doing all of this, don't publish. That doesn't go so well at an organization that is an academic research organization. So there is that balance. As far as the applicability of all of these research, whether they be tools or genes or compounds, those certainly have application, whether they're discovered here or discovered in a large corporation. The challenge here, of course, is that they will be published on prior to large corporation knowing about them. And so it's a balance, and it's a sit down and discover, you know, how far along in this process are we, and how can we even begin to engage in those conversations, sometimes even before the publication is ready to go. And those are the conversations that I think are most productive.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a fun part of our job, right? Is to talk to scientists about what the potential applicability of their work is, because they have no idea until you start to think about what you might do with some of the things that are coming out of your lab. And you look at any sort of basic science discovery that's been translated, you know, into some commercial thing, and they had no idea what they were going to do when that was first discovered. I've used the example for you. I remember this Stanford researcher is talking about when they discovered radio waves. Well, they weren't called radio waves. It was, some subsonic radiation or whatever it was called at the time. They had no idea what could be used for. And the same goes for agriculture or plant science. You just really never know, I think, what some of the discoveries that are made could lead to. So,
yeah, some of the conversations that I run into is you talk to people about, they'll hear about the government funding a research project with like a fruit fly, and for them that seems incredibly silly sometimes to say, like, what possible impact could that have on me? How do you find it's important to kind of be able to tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a BTI example, because you've heard about this one. I think we did a podcast on it. We talked about the Cervarix, the HPV vaccine that was made in an insect cell line that was developed here at BTI. And those cell lines were being developed to do something totally different than what they're actually used for in that commercial sense now. So, we just had no idea what the technology would be used for. It was just really important as a tech transfer professional to just sort of protect the things where you think there might be some value, and then you sort of let the process play out, facilitate it as much as we can, and see what happens. So, how
do you go about deciding what to protect? I mean, I guess you could go through the whole building, right, and just be trying to protect everything, but I'm guessing that wouldn't be very efficient. So is there kind of an approach you take to kind of decide when it's worth going the patent route?
You want to take that one?
Sure. Carefully. Obviously, no, we can't protect everything, but what we can do is we can make an educated decision, and that's founded not only on what the science is, but kind of our projections and understanding of what the market wants, and make selective decisions. In an ideal world, that's shaped sort of like a funnel, right? You've got all of these ideas, all of these papers, all of these discoveries, and a subset of which is filed on, and then a subset of which gets either licensed or is formed a company around. But it's projections, predictions,
yeah,
and best guesses.
One thing that I think, and I've talked over the couple years I've been here, talked with Paul about, is the idea that seems we're living in an interesting time where as much as technology in many ways has improved our way of life, and we're advancing several different areas of our way of life, at the same time we see almost an increase in skepticism towards certain scientific research and the products coming out of that research. How does that impact what you're doing? Do you feel like that, the ability to communicate the true process of the science is becoming increasingly important, so that so you can put a product kind of out to market without there being fear surrounding it? How have you had to kind of come into contact with that, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I can try to answer that one. It's a tough one. Science, if you look back historically, kind of like this place that it's this institute that's kind of on the hill where nobody kind of goes up there. That's where sort of the mad scientists are kind of doing their thing, and people didn't really kind of worry about it. But I think as information technology has changed, people want to know a lot more about what's going on in the world. And so, I think I look at it as a fun challenge, actually, and I think tech transfer is an important part of telling this story about what science potentially can do for people. So, I think we get to tell some of the positive stories, and get people excited about science. And sure, people are skeptical, but that's why we're here, to help them figure out how things work. It's just more information is sometimes a double-edged sword.
Well, and it's funny because we started off today's broadcast talking to Kate and Nathan from Van Eck Lab, and we talked about CRISPR. And then if you follow the news, yesterday CRISPR shows up as, and we talked about this with them, as, depending on which headline you received, was kind of alarming to people on what they were doing, with babies in China. And so, to me, like I read that, I'm just like, wow, that comes across as almost like bad PR for this technology that really stands to benefit a lot of other areas of research. And actually Nathan kind of talked a little bit about really boiling down what that article was really about versus kind of what it was maybe meant to sound like. So like, when you see something like that, does that kind of like set you back, like, oh great, now we have to get the PR machine out there to talk about CRISPR so that people aren't afraid to use it? Or is that just, maybe that just doesn't, you don't worry about that, you just kind of eye on the prize kind of mentality?
I don't know as if I worry about that specific thing, but certainly being more transparent and willing to answer questions, to have conversations, to gain a better understanding of what that science looks like. That certainly, I think, is a role that tech transfer plays. As far as being able to take on some of the larger conversations and topics, I think those are, while certainly we can support that, I don't know as if that's really in our wheelhouse.
Right.
That's not necessarily where the heart of tech transfer is.
Well, it becomes I guess it's a matter of like, at some point it becomes not worth the time investment, or
I think all technologies take time before they're adopted, and there's always a sense of skepticism before it's fully accepted. Look at any technology that's come out. The idea that, we'll take the phone, right? Smartphone. If you'd told me, when I got my first smartphone, that I would have more power in a small tool than my computer that I had sitting on my desk, I would have not believed you. But now, of course, like I can't even function without a smartphone, right? So I think the same is true with any technology, is that it takes time and it takes understanding of both its application and, what are the potential harms? When smartphones first came out, they had all those things about cancer and brain tumors.
Right.
And today, I don't think anybody thinks twice about putting it up against their head or in their pocket.
Well, we also, it's talking on, it's the last thing we probably do at this point too, so. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, I totally agree with Erica. The only thing I would add is, technology, you look at computer technology moving so rapidly. The same goes for biology. Yeah. Things are moving incredibly fast. You look at when I was a graduate student, the kind of things we did back then are, just silly now in a sense, because of the technology we currently have. So, we can help people with technical questions and help them understand the science and why we think, we should use this genomic tool or that genetic tool. But I think you're always also going to have ethical questions, right? And when you start talking about CRISPR and gene editing and things, there's lots of things we can do, and there's lots of things that we may decide as a society that maybe it's not a good road to go down. So, but I think those are just interesting conversations to have. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
So speaking of some interesting things coming out of BTI, let's get to the startup kind of world. We're starting to kind of merge entrepreneurship a little bit with the basic research here at BTI. Tell us about the companies that have been created thus far, and kind of what is kind of the belief behind that as to why it's something that BTI wants to continue to do and support.
Yeah, so why don't I tell you a little bit about what I consider like a current startup portfolio here at BTI, and I'll talk about 3 examples that we're currently working on, and I think you may have heard of one of them in one of the earlier
with
interviews that you gave with Murley. And Murley is a great example of a BTI scientist who is going to go off and work with a startup company, so it's an interesting opportunity for him. But the first company that I'll just briefly tell you about, just to give you a flavor, is a more established company that actually exists out in Pasadena, California. It's a company called Holoclara. They work on using small molecule compounds that come from nematodes, so worms that, I don't know if Frank is one of the people that you're going to talk to.
No, but Merle
today.
touched a little bit upon.
Did he talk a little bit
the
about
nematodes?
Yeah, so that company is using these compounds potentially to treat autoimmune related disorders. There's an old, it's about 30 years old now, scientific hypothesis that's out there that's called the hygiene hypothesis. And everybody has kind of heard about, maybe it's a good idea to get your kids dirty.
Yeah.
It might help boost their immune system a little bit.
Eat some dirt, kids.
Right. And if you look over the last, probably 50 years or so, we see with increased antibiotic use and, you see this strong decrease in infectious disease. And at the same time, you see this strong increase in autoimmune related disorders. I mean, those are just correlations, not necessarily causations. But if you look in some parts of the world where we have parasitic infections that we don't kind of see in the world, the more hygienic world that we live in, you see lower incidences of autoimmune related disorders and fewer allergies, things like food allergies. And so I think the quest really for Holoclara is, what is it that's in those environments that people are being exposed to that can give them some level of protection, and they think they might be on to what those things are. So that's a collaboration between BTI and researchers at Caltech that started that company. The second company, Ascribe Biosciences, what you heard Merle talk about, is a somewhat related project, because there we're actually using small molecule compounds, similar compounds from these worms to treat agricultural crops, to protect them from disease, actually done through a seed coating technology. And we just recently were awarded an SBIR grant for that work. So that's going to be housed here in the McGovern Center.
Great.
On the Cornell campus. So you'll hear more about that in the coming year. And then the last one is that I can tell you about is it's called Effector RX. And this is one that, each of these startups starts as sort of a conceptual idea here at BTI. We have some technology that we think may have some applicability commercial, and we want to work on developing that technology ourselves. So this one actually comes from Greg Martin's lab. Greg's been here at BTI for about 25 years or so now, working on a model system in tomato with a bacteria that causes a disease in tomato called speck, which is kind of a big problem for agricultural growers, tomato growers over the years.
And if you have a small garden at home, you've probably run into this
Right.
on occasion.
Yeah. And one of the things that they study is they not only study what's happening on the plant side, but they study what's happening on the pathogen side. And I think, in some of the conversations we had, we'll use this terminology that we call a molecular arms race between plants and the microbes that are trying to infect them. And as the plants develop and evolve ways to circumvent the attack that they're getting from these pathogens, and one of those is a bacterial pathogen. It's a bacteria that causes speck. And those bacteria produce proteins that actually cause they cause programmed cell death in the plants. And so one of the things that they've also evolved are compounds that actually inhibit that programmed cell death, because programmed cell death is one of the ways that plants try to stop an invasion from a pathogen. And so the bacteria are making these compounds to stop that defense response. And I won't get into all the technical stuff behind it, but one of the things we can use plants for is to make what we call recombinant proteins. So different proteins can be produced in plants, like we produce influenza vaccine in chicken eggs. And these are compounds that can help us improve that process of producing proteins in plants. And so that's the focus of that particular technology. But we're just getting going, trying to figure out how we're going to make that one happen. So that one's in its infancy.
So what would you say, one of you can answer this, or both, what is kind of maybe the 5-10 year plan for tech transfer? Like where would you like to see BTI, what's your ideal vision for the future? I mean, when I got here, this department was Paul, and now it's 3 people. So clearly it's on the rise, and it's becoming a more important side of BTI. So where do you see it going? Where do you want it to get to?
What do you think? You want to try that?
I mean, I'd like to see that all of the people who are interested in entrepreneurship have an opportunity to both view it from, understand more about it, but also be engaged in it. I'd like to see a lot more companies get spun out. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to have difficult conversations with the finance department that says that the tech transfer department's making too much money, and that in order to keep the nonprofit status, that would be a dream. In reality, I think it's more likely that to spin more companies out and to have at least one or two of them be rather successful, either that they grow themselves or that they are acquired by another large company. That would be what maybe is more realistic goal.
Yeah, I totally agree with Erica. It's one of the things you got to keep in mind is that these projects, probably more than 9 out of 10 of them, are usually not successful. So, you really just have to keep plugging away at different technologies until you find one that really is a hit. But even on the things where we don't have success, we learn a lot about the science behind each one of those technologies. So it's not really a hit or miss completely situation. So, I told you about the plant-made vaccine project. Never led to a commercial product, but the amount of knowledge that we learned about plants and plant-made vaccines and vaccine technology in general is a really important legacy of that project that's probably being used for other technology development or other science now.
And that's something that's come out throughout conversations with everyone today. It's just everyone kind of has the problem they're focused on trying to address, but along the way there's always new insights coming out that could be applicable for other areas. And I think that's kind of the reason we call it discovery science, because you're always kind of finding these things that you didn't know about before, these processes that you didn't really understand, but maybe you just shed some light on it in pursuit of something else. Kind of going back to the HPV example. Okay, last question, we just had a couple minutes, is the non-science question. So when you're not doing your job in tech transfer, what are some of your hobbies that you enjoy doing outside of this whole science sphere? And if your hobbies still are involved in science, that's okay too.
Well, I'm possibly the least interesting. I'm in law school, so outside of work, I am going to part-time law school at Seton Hall University.
Wow, that is a full-time hobby.
Yes.
Tech transfer with a little law school on the side. That's very impressive. Paul, I'm sure you're impressive too.
Yeah, not that impressive. What do I like to do outside of BTI? I love to ski.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to Colorado in a few weeks.
Okay.
We got a good early season start this year, so I'm out of here to do some skiing for a while. I like to go hunting. I go hunting with other scientists.
Oh, there you go.
That come here from BTI, so that's kind of one of my shared hobbies that I have with other scientists here at the Institute. I have a family, 2 boys and a wife. Spend some time taking care of them.
Sometime, a little bit.
Once in a while.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. And you can learn more about our tech transfer team on our btiscience.org website. Go to the tech transfer department and you'll learn all about the great work of Paul, Erica, and Kelly, who's another member of the team, and all the really great innovative stuff that they're helping come out of BTI. We will be back in just a couple minutes with another BTI alumnus, and we'll talk all about somebody that isn't currently at BTI but was here and now is working in industry and what adventures that has brought. So come on back in just about 2 or 3 minutes. We'll be back. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.